Welcome back to my channel. I'm Ricky Carson. We post new videos here every single day, so if you're not subscribed, subscribe now. What are you doing if you're not subscribed? We post new videos every single day. Did I mention that? We post new videos every single day. Sometimes they're vlogs, sometimes they're video essays. Every single time, it's always a good time. We always learn something new, always have a new experience. For the past few years, I've been really studying the history of the United States and Canada and how these two countries came to be. And without getting into all of that, which is funny because this is a video about Canada and the United States, but I have a proposal that the United States and Canada create a security agency, a union for the continent, forming an agency such as NACSA, which would be North American Continental Security Agency, would be tremendous for the two nations and for their people. The United States and Canada share a common language, we share a common history, and the majority of Canadians who live outside of Canada live in the United States. Canada is the United States' largest trading partner, and there's just so much cross-border relations that have been the case for literally centuries. Before Canada was a country, before the United States was a country, before there was even a thought of an independent nation on the North American continent, outside of the European colonial context. As someone who has personally spent time in Canada, who has friends and family who live in Canada, I always want to think about how we can improve our lives, the quality of our lives, and I think that creating a security agency where anyone flying into Canada or the United States or entering Canada or the United States, generally speaking, would have to go through a security agency like TSA, but be in partnership with both countries. And so both of our jurisdictions would be applied equally because we would have the same laws in terms of what are their legal requirements for entering North America. And before you guys get on me about not including Mexico, I did share this post on my Instagram story because the reason why I'm making this video is because I saw this clip kind of like talking about the potential beginnings of doing something like this. So take a look.
If you travel a lot between Canada and the United States, that trip across the border could be a lot different very soon. There's a new initiative that would see Canada's border guards work much more closely with their American counterparts.
Well, it's being described as game-changing, and it could very much change the way that people cross the border in the future. Now, typically, when you go to cross the land border between Canada and the U.S., you would see two buildings. One would be on the U.S. side and one would be on the Canadian side. On one side, you've got U.S. law. On the other side, you've got Canadian law. Now, what they're proposing is to bring the two together. They're calling it pre-clearance. Now, what would happen is that at some crossings, Canadian guards would be working in the U.S. building, and at other crossings, American guards would be working in the Canadian building.
So after I saw that, I was like, this is the perfect time to share my thoughts and opinions on this matter. And so what I did is I just said point blank that, I have long said that Canada and the United States should have a joint security agency, one that allows the free movement of goods, services, and people without having a hard border, just like the European Union. And one of my former colleagues I used to work with at the Oregon State Legislature, he responded, what about Mexico? And that is a really good question. What about Mexico? And this is my response. It's a little bit technical, but I thought you guys would appreciate it. In today's political climate, I believe it's more socially and politically feasible to create a union between the United States and Canada first. Then once demographics have fully shifted, proof of concept is shown, that's when Mexico could join. But just like how the United States and Canada will have stipulations for one another in order to join, so will the newly formed union have in order for Mexico to join. Of course, every country in North America has its systemic problems, but Mexico has more homicides than even the US, and violence against political leaders is through the roof. Hundreds of Mexican politicians have been assassinated by cartels, and its general standard of living is noticeably lower than the US and Canada. Plus, not to mention that though the US and Mexico are related, Canadians and Americans culturally, historically, are more aligned with one another, and thus the two populations would assimilate more easily. My friend said that's a very political way of saying they are white, which I had to do a laughing emoji because that's not the reason why. But the United States and Canada is like, unless you're like living in a far off land, like we do share such a strong identity with one another. With my political hat on, like I want to suggest stuff that would actually be able to get people talking, you know. And I think that if there was to be a North American Security Union that would allow free movement of goods, services, and people, it would have to start with the United States and Canada. Now, here are my, like, obviously there's lots of stuff that we'd have to change and reform in both countries in order for this to happen. There's a lot of ones that are not very sexy, but some of the more sexy things that the United States and Canada would have to like get on is corruption. Corruption is a big problem, mostly in the United States. The United States would need to clean its act up. Gun violence, the United States would also need to clean its act up in terms of that by having like meaningful gun reform in order to move forward. And lastly, which is not the last thing, but we would definitely need to move to a social healthcare system. Ideally, we would also have a socialized education system that would go all the way up to college, but I think that we need to make sure that everyone across the continent has access to free or affordable healthcare, but education is important. But also everyone, going back to the gun things, everyone needs to feel safe and secure in a reasonable manner. And so I think those are the kind of the biggest stipulations that Canada would have for the United States in order for Canada to potentially feel comfortable joining. I know that the United States would be way more, like Americans, I should say. Let's leave the governments at the door right here, okay? The Americans would be, my hunch, my theory, is the Americans would be way more for a union with Canada than Canadians would be with Americans. And that has to do with a few factors, mostly the fact that Canada was a country that was formed to combat the growing influence of the United States on the North American continent. It was originally the Dominion of Canada that was governed by Lord Durham, who was appointed by the British monarchy. And then when the US colonies rebelled against Britain, Lord Durham created a famous report called the Durham Report, where he sent a letter to the monarch and saying, like, basically, yo, these guys in your colonies in North America, they need an identity of their own, because they're starting to talk about how appealing, you know, those Yankees rebels down in the newly formed United States. They're looking at them and saying, like, are we better off being under the British thumb, or should we join the Americans? Because it was not all clear that yeah, it's just not clear that that's what that was going to happen. The monarch gives him permission to create the country of Canada, which wouldn't technically be self-governing. Like, wouldn't be it was self-governing from its inception, but it was actually not like fully independent until I'm gonna screw this up, but the Charter Bill of Rights and Freedoms Act, which was entrenched in the Canadian Constitution in 1982, that was when Canada no longer had to have any of their laws signed off by Westminster, because before that time, even though it was just a formality at this point, Canada would still have to send any new laws, any new federal laws, and have them be okayed by Westminster in the UK, and then they would be able to enact them. But so it wasn't until 1982 since Canada has had its full autonomy. Now the dynamics of North America have shifted so much since even the 80s, and the British influence in the world has dwindled to a drip, even though Canadians are still very Tied to the British monarchy, I think that they are more closely and relevantly connected to the United States. I will say this one thing. I feel like it would probably be weird for Americans, off-putting for Canadians to still have King Charles as the head of state and to still have monarchy on their notes. I don't think that would be necessarily a big turnoff for Americans. It would be interesting to see if this would eventually lead to just a standard currency. Obviously, the dollar, just like in the European Union, how there is a shared currency. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that the Canadian currency, its worth is based off of the US dollar, which if that's the case, it's not actually that surprising because 80% of the world's currencies are based off of the US dollar. I just think that the United States and Canada are both predominantly populated by middle-class people who are the backbones of this economy. And I feel like strengthening relationships and bringing each other closer in wouldn't just generally help grow the economy, expand the movement of people across the continent. It would give so many more people opportunities that normally wouldn't have had it. I just think that would be a phenomenal plan to create NACSA, NACSA, North American Continental Security Agency. Once Canada and the United States are shown to be thriving, and we have a lot of and our politicians are actually remedying actual issues, especially in terms of immigration and stuff. I think that's when you could see the United States and Canada and this newly formed union begin potential conversations with Mexico. However, Mexico has a lot that they need to do, and I don't want to make it seem like the United States and Canada have not been fucking oppressing Mexico. We have been, particularly the United States. So I don't want to come off saying Mexico's problems were brought on by themselves. Obviously the United States has had a major helping hand. Once Mexico no longer is fully dictated by the will of cartels, once they stop killing their politicians, because again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in 2023 or 2022, over 700 politicians in Mexico were killed. Their homicide rate is over 36,000 a year, lives, which is more than the United States, which is bizarre. And there's just general standard of living, quality of living is really low, and so to be able to incorporate that type of living standard and wealth inequality into the United States and Canada would be way more detrimental to the people of Mexico than actually it would be to the United States and Canada, because we're already seeing very affluent Californians and other Americans moving to Mexico because the cost of living is so low and they're raising the prices of housing. And so it actually would be more beneficial for Mexico to kind of get its shit together on those fronts, and then we could just be a whole big old happy family on Turtle Island, which I think would be a phenomenal idea. Well, anyway, that's my case on why Canada and the United States should create the North American Continental Security Agency. Let me know down below in the comments of what you guys think, if you think that this is a good idea, if there are some things that I fucking miss and you're like, Ricky, how could you fucking be missing this? This is a big red sign. Get your shit together. I want to hear it. I'm actually really curious because I've usually heard pretty good responses. That said, I've mostly have talked to this with Americans, so I'm also curious if there's some Canadian viewers out there who would be interested, or if they're yeah, we would want to do that, but Ricky, America needs to do this, this, and this also in order for us to feel comfortable doing that. Anyway, guys, I post new videos every single day. If you didn't already remember that, if you're new here, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one, guys. All right, peace. Love you guys. Bye.